2 hours and 40 minutes of content. Lines upon lines to memorize. One me, one play. One of the most difficult things I have ever done in my entire life.
Almost everything. Production.
Hello everyone, and today this happened. Yeah, this was by far the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. Harder than the Carolina Reaper, harder than the ice bath, harder than the Bring Sally Up, Bring Sally Down challenge. And I started this as a way of doing something different. My original plan was to do Hamlet, but then I decided that's about 4 hours long, and I want to do something a little bit more simple before I would do something that difficult. And I chose The Two Gentlemen of Verona just because I thought that might meet those purposes. But anyways, it was a lot harder than I ever would have expected. And I am glad that I did it, but I won't deny there were a few things that went wrong. I just wanted to talk about it a little bit and answer the question, will I do this again? So when I finally decided that I was really going to do this, the first thing that I did was figure out how I was going to make this play. And that was when I noticed something odd. It wasn't going to be all that difficult. I mean, the props were easy enough to come by, and playing all the characters wasn't going to be too much of a challenge. The real hard thing about this was just memorizing the lines and playing the characters. It was almost as if Shakespeare knew this was going to happen, as if he knew someone might make this entire play by themselves. And when I say that out loud, I know it's kind of silly, but there were definitely moments when I wondered that. But yes, I knew that there was going to be some difficult things that were going to happen, some challenges I was going to have to face. And by God, were they. The first problem I ran into was memorization. Mostly from Lance and Proteus. And more specifically, Lance. Lance has lines that go on for sometimes 3 minutes. And granted, Lance is not a character that's in the play for very long, but one of his lines was the hardest line I did, period. And it was just about him and his dog peeing, and I'll show you it later on in the week, but pretty much everything went wrong during that line that could go wrong. My camera died. I had to, after memorizing it, I had to sleep and do it later. And I think the whole thing ended up just taking 13 hours. It was just pure hell. But the easiest person to do was actually Julia. And I'm pretty sure she was a bad actor, and Shakespeare was feeding her the lines through the pictures and through the letters. But I didn't have too much problem with her. So, the second problem that I ran into was getting into the mind of these characters. And I suppose in some ways that was the most difficult thing to do, at least at a spiritual level. Because Proteus was an almost rapist. And I tried to show him in a human way. I wanted to be honest with this character, show that he's not just a monster, that he's complicated, just like everyone else is. But yeah, it was a difficult character to play. Now, I'd say my favorite character in this play was Sylvia. I don't even really know why, but I've always had a little bit of I've always liked those characters that not everyone else likes in Shakespeare, like Horatio from Hamlet and Puck from A Midsummer Night Dream. And Sylvia just seemed cool to me, and so I definitely say she was my favorite. Now, the third thing, and I think this was the hardest thing by far, was the editing. And Filmora is a decent website for editing. I don't hate it, but I will say that it sometimes quiets down your voice when you end a clip, and you really have to you have to have a pause after you say any line. You have to be for about 5 seconds, and then you'll be able to make it work. But there was also the problem where if I made a mistake and I wanted to correct it, it was basically impossible. I would have to go back through the files, and that could just take hours, and it just wasn't worth it. So yeah, I know that there were some things I did wrong, like Valentine and Valentine, and probably a bunch of other stuff that I don't even know about. But I just really wasn't able to correct those things. It's just the way the editing software worked. And the hardest part about it was the end, where I finally finished the whole thing. I had the whole thing done, all of part 4. And just as I was about to just release it, the whole thing just crashes. It says the entire file was lost. And I just sat there and just looked like, how? And I was like, yeah, this was the hardest thing I've ever done, just because of that. That just, I won't lie, I threw a tantrum. I'm not going to deny that. I did. I feel bad about it, but it's the truth. So, yes, editing is the hardest thing. If you ever do something like this, just get ready for the editing. So this leads to the final question, and the most important question. Would I be willing to do this again? And the short answer is yes. Yes, I would. It was the most difficult thing I've ever done, and it was also a thing where everything that could go wrong did. But at the same time, I like a challenge. And sometimes I think that it's not necessarily the projects that you like doing the most that are going to be your best. Sometimes you have to kind of hate the project for it to be really good. But in order to do it a few more times, I would need support. I would need people actually like watching it quite a lot. I need at least 50 views on these videos. So yeah, I will need your support to do this. But I will promise that even if I don't get that support, I will still do some more Shakespeare-related stuff. So Shakespeare is not completely over. But anyways, I learned a lot from this. I learned how to do a lot of acting. I learned a lot of directing. And I gained one of my favorite subscribers here. I'm not going to say their name, but I think they know who they are. So yeah, this was a real joy, and I'm glad that you came along with me for the ride.